You think an old man like me can't fix a bike? Watch and learn. The words hung in the air like a challenge, as 75-year-old Jack Carter stood in his cluttered garage, eyeing the broken bicycle in front of him. The kids from the neighborhood had come to him for help once again, but this time, there was more skepticism in their eyes. A group of young boys and girls, their bikes scattered across the driveway, looked at him as if he were out of place. The youngest, Timmy, with a red cap turned backward, scoffed. "You really think you can fix this, Grandpa?" he muttered, hands in his pockets, clearly unimpressed. Jack's weathered hands didn't flinch. He'd seen worse in his time, and a few mocking kids weren't going to stop him. He knew these bikes like the back of his hand. A lifetime of fixing military machinery had taught him more than enough to handle a rusted pedal or a broken chain. He squatted down next to the first bike, running his fingers over the gears. The kids whispered behind him, clearly doubting. But Jack wasn't in a rush. He'd spent decades in the military, fixing things that weren't supposed to be fixed, making miracles happen in the most impossible conditions. Now, he was doing the same for the next generation. "All right, Timmy," Jack said, his voice steady, "let's see what we've got here." He pulled out his toolbox, the worn metal gleaming under the dim light of the garage. Each tool had a purpose, each piece a reminder of the years spent keeping machinery running under fire. The kids watched, unsure of what to expect. Jack didn't need high-tech gadgets or the latest in repair equipment, he had what he needed, experience. As he worked, he spoke without looking up. "Back in my day, we didn't have fancy diagnostics. We had to figure things out the old way, by feel, by instinct." He tightened a bolt, then moved to another. The clinking of his tools against the bike's frame was the only sound in the garage. Timmy walked over, still skeptical, but something in the way Jack worked had caught his attention. "You were in the army, right?" Timmy asked, leaning in closer. Jack paused for a moment, then glanced up with a faint smile. "I've been in worse situations than a broken bike. If you're patient enough, anything can be fixed." His words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, the kids fell silent. They hadn't expected this from the old man. They had expected him to fumble, to fail, but here he was, quietly working his magic. After a few more minutes, Jack stood up and tested the bike. The pedals spun smoothly, the chain clicked into place, and the bike was ready to go. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at the group. Timmy's eyes widened in disbelief, and the other kids stared in awe. "How did you do that?" Timmy asked, his tone changing. Jack chuckled softly. "With the right tools and the right experience, kid. It's all about knowing how things work." The kids slowly gathered around, their doubts fading. They were no longer looking at him as the old man in the garage. They were looking at someone who knew what he was doing, someone who had earned the respect of those who understood real skill. Jack smiled, wiping his brow. "Now, who's next?" As the kids crowded around Jack, their skepticism began to fade. Timmy, the youngest, was the first to break the silence. "I didn't think you could actually fix it," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Jack smiled, wiping his hands on an old rag. "Sometimes it just takes a little patience," he replied. The kids, now clearly impressed, began to gather their bikes, eager for Jack to work his magic on the next one. There was a shift in the air, what started as mockery had turned into genuine respect. "So, what's next?" Jack asked, gesturing to the pile of bikes. "My bike needs a new brake," said Sarah, one of the older kids. She rolled her bike over to Jack, her hands on her hips, clearly still unsure but willing to give him a chance. Jack nodded, his eyes narrowing in focus. "All right, let's see what we've got." He crouched down next to her bike, inspecting the brakes. As he worked, he explained the process to Sarah. "Back in my day, we didn't have all these fancy gadgets to help us. We had to make do with what we had. It's all about understanding the basics and trusting your hands." Sarah watched him, slowly realizing that this wasn't just an old man fixing bikes. There was something about the way Jack moved, the way he handled each tool with purpose, that made her rethink everything she thought she knew. She found herself listening more intently than she had before. "Did you really fix machines like this in the army?" Sarah asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Jack paused for a moment, then looked up at her with a thoughtful expression. "I did more than fix machines, kid. Sometimes, it was about saving lives with a wrench or a screwdriver. We didn't have time for mistakes." Sarah's eyes widened. She had no idea what kind of work Jack had done in his younger years, but now she understood that his skills were not just from fixing bikes in his garage. They were born from a lifetime of real-world experience. Jack tightened the brake cable and tested it, then stood up. "That should do it," he said, giving the bike a quick spin. Sarah nervously gripped the handlebars, her face lighting up as she realized the bike was as good as new. "Wow, it feels like it's brand new," she exclaimed. Jack nodded, a simple smile on his face. Sometimes, it's the little things that make all the difference. The kids, now gathered around, exchanged looks of awe. Timmy, the one who had been the most skeptical, stepped forward. "Hey, do you think you could teach me how to do that?" Jack chuckled softly. "It takes years to learn what I know, Timmy. But I'll teach you what I can." The kids, now fully captivated, gathered around Jack's garage like a group of apprentices, eager to learn. For the first time, they didn't see an old man. They saw a teacher, a mentor, and a veteran with a lifetime of wisdom to offer. Jack looked at them, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. "All right, who's next?" he asked, his voice steady, his hands ready to work. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to learn more than just how to fix a bike. They were about to learn the value of hard work, patience, and the power of experience. The kids had gathered around Jack once again, their eyes wide with curiosity as they watched him work. They were no longer skeptical, now, they were eager to learn, each one hanging on his every move. Jack had become more than just the old man in the neighborhood, they now saw him as someone who held the keys to a wealth of knowledge and experience. As Jack worked on the next bike, tightening a loose chain, he began to talk, his voice steady and calm, as if sharing a secret that only a few would ever truly understand. "When I was in the army," he said, glancing up at the group of kids, "I didn't just fix machinery. I had to fix a lot of things, things that couldn't be fixed with tools, things that took time, patience, and trust." The kids looked at him, intrigued, but unsure of what he meant. "You see," Jack continued, "in a war, you're not always working on things that you can see or touch. Sometimes, you're working on people, making sure they can keep going, even when everything around them falls apart. The best mechanic isn't the one with the fancy tools, it's the one who knows how to think and act when things go wrong." Sarah, the oldest of the group, leaned in. "You mean, you help people like that?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder. Jack nodded slowly, a flicker of something deep in his eyes, a quiet sadness that only those who had lived through tough times could understand. "Yeah, I helped. But sometimes, helping means knowing when to step back and let people find their own strength." The kids stood there in silence, processing his words. Jack finished with the bike, standing up and wiping his hands on his old work apron. "All right, who's next?" he asked, but no one moved. They were too busy thinking about what he had said. Timmy, who had been the most skeptical of Jack at first, stepped forward. "Teach me how to do it," he said, his voice firm, no longer laced with doubt. Jack raised an eyebrow but smiled. "You sure you're ready to learn?" Timmy nodded enthusiastically. "I'm ready." Jack smiled again, a rare warmth in his expression. "All right then, let's get to work." For the next hour, Jack taught the kids the basics of bike repair, showing them how to adjust brakes, tighten chains, and patch up flat tires. He explained each step, his voice slow and deliberate, making sure they understood. The kids listened intently, asking questions and practicing on their own bikes. They were no longer just watching a man work, they were learning how to do it themselves. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the garage, Jack looked at the group. They were no longer the skeptical kids who had doubted him, they were young mechanics in the making, each with a newfound respect for the old man and the lessons he had taught them. Jack stood back, his work done for the day, and surveyed the scene. The bikes were all in working order, the kids were smiling, and most importantly, they were learning. For Jack, that was enough. He had taught them more than just how to fix bikes, he had taught them the value of patience, skill, and a lifetime of experience. And as the kids rode off, each with a repaired bike and a story to tell, Jack knew that the lessons would stay with them long after they left his garage. The next morning, the sun shone brightly over the quiet neighborhood as Jack sat in his garage, sipping his coffee. The kids had gone home the night before, all of them eager to show off their newly fixed bikes. Jack had spent the last hour cleaning up his tools, putting everything back in its rightful place. He was content, not just with the work, but with the lessons that had been shared. He was used to being alone, but this was different. The silence felt warmer now, knowing that he had made a difference in those kids' lives. Timmy was the first to show up that morning, his bike gleaming in the sunlight. "Hey, Jack!" "It's running better than ever," Timmy called out, grinning ear to ear. Jack smiled back, standing up from his workbench. "Glad to hear it," he replied, wiping his hands on his rag. "How's it feel to have a bike that actually works?" Timmy hopped onto his bike and pedaled around the driveway. "It feels awesome," he shouted. "I didn't think it could be this smooth." "Thanks, man." Jack chuckled. "It's all about the details, Timmy. And patience." The other kids began to trickle in, one by one, all with their bikes in tow. They rode in, showing off their bikes, each one proud of the work they had done with Jack's help. Sarah, who had been quiet the day before, rode up with a smile on her face. "Hey, Jack," she said, stopping in front of him. "I went out for a ride this morning. It felt great." "You were right. Sometimes it's not just about the tools. It's about knowing how to use them." Jack nodded, his gaze softening. "That's the lesson, Sarah. It's not just about fixing things, it's about understanding how they work, inside and out." The kids gathered around, listening intently. Jack was used to the sound of their chatter, but today, there was something different in the air, an understanding, a connection that hadn't been there before. They weren't just kids looking for a quick fix, they were learners, ready to take on the next challenge. "You know," Jack continued, "life's a lot like fixing bikes. Things break down, but with the right knowledge and a little effort, you can get things back in working order." Timmy, who had been quietly absorbing everything Jack said, spoke up. "I think I get it. It's not just about fixing stuff. It's about knowing how to make it last, right?" Jack smiled, proud of the way Timmy had understood. "Exactly. It's about making things last, and about knowing how to handle things when they go wrong." The kids nodded in agreement, each one feeling a sense of accomplishment. They had learned more than just how to fix their bikes, they had learned a lesson in life. Jack stood back and watched them for a moment, feeling a sense of pride in his heart. He had passed on something more valuable than bike repair skills, he had shared the value of patience, hard work, and understanding. As the day went on, the kids continued to ride around the neighborhood, their bikes running smoother than they ever had before. Jack knew they would remember these lessons, not just for the rest of the summer, but for years to come. And as he watched them ride off, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a connection. He wasn't just the old man in the garage anymore. He was a mentor, a teacher, and for once, he wasn't alone. As the days passed, Jack's garage became a regular gathering spot for the kids. Every afternoon, they would show up, bikes in tow, eager to learn more. It wasn't just about fixing bikes anymore, it was about learning the little things that made a big difference in life. Jack didn't mind the company, in fact, he found himself looking forward to their visits. The neighborhood felt more alive, filled with the sounds of laughter and the chatter of kids who had finally found a new respect for something other than technology. One day, Sarah, who had started to become a leader among the group, arrived early. Her bike was in perfect condition, but she had a different question on her mind. "Jack, I've been thinking, she began, sitting down beside him while he worked on a loose chain. What made you start doing this? I mean, you didn't have to help us. You could have just stayed in your garage, right? Jack paused, considering her question. He didn't always talk much about his past, but something about Sarah's sincerity made him feel it was time to share. When I first joined the army, I was young, just like you, he started, looking down at his hands as if they were telling the story for him. I didn't know much about anything, except how to follow orders. But one thing I learned quickly was that there were always people who needed help. And those who knew how to fix things, whether it was a broken engine or a broken spirit, were the ones who made a real difference. Sarah listened intently, sensing the gravity in his words. So you're saying you've always been a fixer? She asked. Jack smiled faintly. In a way. But fixing things in the army wasn't about tools or gadgets. It was about knowing how to approach a problem, how to stay calm when everything's falling apart around you. I carried that lesson with me, even after I left. Sarah nodded, absorbing the weight of his words. It was becoming clear to her now that Jack's skills weren't just about mechanical work, they were about life itself. I never really thought about it like that, she admitted. I mean, I get how fixing bikes is important, but I didn't think about how all the little things we learn, like fixing bikes, could teach us about handling life. Jack leaned back, wiping his hands on his work apron. Exactly. And you'll find that the skills you learn here, whether it's fixing a bike or dealing with people, will stick with you. Life's full of little problems, but if you know how to fix them, you can handle anything that comes your way. The conversation lingered in the air, the words sinking in with a quiet weight. Just then, Timmy rode in, his usual wide grin plastered on his face. He was followed by the rest of the group, all of them laughing and talking about their day. It wasn't long before they were back at work, each kid taking turns helping one another with their bikes. Jack watched them, feeling a sense of pride. They had come a long way since that first day when they doubted his abilities. Now, they were a team, learning, growing, and fixing things together. For Jack, it wasn't just about passing on his knowledge of mechanics. It was about giving them something more, a sense of purpose, a sense of community, and the belief that they could handle whatever challenges came their way. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the driveway, the kids packed up their bikes and waved goodbye, each one promising to return the next day. Jack stood there for a moment, watching them go, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. He knew that what he had given them wasn't just about fixing bikes. It was about fixing lives. And that, he thought, was worth more than any tool or repair manual could offer. It had been a few weeks since Jack started working with the kids, and something had changed in the neighborhood. It wasn't just the bikes that were running smoothly now. The kids had begun to pick up on Jack's lessons in a way that surprised him. They weren't just fixing bikes, they were fixing things in their own lives. Timmy, for instance, had started helping his younger brother with his homework, a task that had always frustrated him before. Sarah, the oldest, had taken a more active role in the community, organizing small cleanup days and getting more kids involved in keeping the neighborhood in good shape. Jack was in his garage one afternoon, tightening the bolts on his workbench, when Sarah came by with a smile. "Hey, Jack, you got a minute?" she asked, walking into the garage. Jack looked up, wiping his hands on his apron. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, her hands fidgeting with a loose strand of hair. "I've been thinking about what you said that day. About how life's like fixing a bike." Jack raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Yeah?" "Well," she began, "I'm starting to see it. All this time, I thought I could fix things by just doing the obvious stuff, like tightening a chain or fixing a flat. But now, I see that it's more about understanding why things break in the first place. And the same goes for people, right?" Jack nodded slowly. "Exactly. You can fix a bike all day, but if you don't understand how it works, it's just going to break again. People are the same way. You have to know what makes them tick to really help them." Sarah looked down at her hands, deep in thought. I've been trying to apply that to the kids in the neighborhood. You know, like, not just telling them what to do, but figuring out what's really going on with them. I think I'm getting through to them." Jack smiled, his eyes softening with pride. "You're doing good, Sarah. You're learning what it means to be a leader. Sometimes, the best way to fix a problem is to help others fix their own." Sarah beamed, feeling a sense of accomplishment that went beyond bike repairs. "Thanks, Jack. I think I get it now. It's not about being the one to do everything. It's about helping others see what they can do for themselves." Just then, Timmy rode up, his younger brother following close behind. "Hey, Jack!" Timmy called out. "You got a minute? I need some help with my brakes." Jack stood up, dusting his hands off. "Of course, Timmy. Bring it over here." As Timmy wheeled his bike up to the workbench, Jack could see that the boy wasn't the same kid who had walked into his garage weeks ago. He was more confident now, more sure of himself. "You know," Timmy said, as Jack started working on the bike, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said. About how it's not just about fixing things on the outside. It's about fixing what's inside too." Jack gave him a small, approving nod. "That's right, Timmy. And the more you understand yourself, the better you'll be at fixing the things that really matter." Timmy looked up at him, his expression thoughtful. "I think I'm getting it, Jack. I think I'm starting to see things differently." Jack finished adjusting the brake and handed the bike back to Timmy. "You're doing good work, Timmy. Keep it up." As Timmy rode off, Jack watched him for a moment, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about the bikes. It was about the changes he had seen in the kids, their growth, their maturity, and the way they had begun to take responsibility for themselves and their community. Jack knew he had made a difference. And that, he thought, was worth more than any repair he could ever make. It was another warm Saturday morning when Jack opened his garage door, the sun casting a golden light over the neighborhood. He'd been expecting the usual group of kids, but today felt different. The air was filled with a sense of anticipation, and Jack could feel the energy shifting. As he began to organize his tools, Sarah rolled up on her bike, followed closely by Timmy and a few others. This time, however, there was something new in the way they carried themselves. There was a quiet confidence in their steps, a sense of responsibility that hadn't been there before. Sarah was the first to speak, her tone more mature than it had been just weeks ago. "Jack, we've been thinking," she said, glancing at the others. "We've learned so much from you, but we realized we can't just keep coming back for help every time something goes wrong. We need to be able to fix things on our own, too." Jack looked up from his work, his eyes softening with pride. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment when the kids would take what he had taught them and start applying it to their own lives. "That's the spirit, Sarah," he said, giving her a nod of approval. "You've got the right idea. Learning is about more than just fixing things, it's about learning how to fix things for yourself and then helping others along the way." Timmy, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "We were thinking about starting a project to fix up the bikes of the other kids in the neighborhood who don't have the money to pay for repairs. Some of them have been struggling with broken bikes for months." Jack smiled, impressed by their initiative. "That's a great idea, Timmy. You're not just fixing bikes, you're giving back to the community. That's what it's all about." The kids began to excitedly discuss the logistics of the project, planning how they would gather the necessary tools and find bikes in need of repair. They talked about setting up a schedule, organizing their work, and making sure every bike that came through their hands would be fixed and returned to its owner. It was a plan born from the lessons Jack had shared with them, and he couldn't have been prouder. As the conversation died down, Sarah turned to Jack, her eyes reflecting a newfound maturity. "Jack, you've taught us so much, but we want to be able to keep this going even when you're not around. Can you help us figure out how to keep learning, keep improving, and keep helping others?" Jack took a deep breath, thinking for a moment. "You don't need me around to keep this going, Sarah. The lessons are inside you now. It's not about having someone show you the way every time, it's about trusting yourselves and each other." You'll figure it out. And when you do, you'll be the ones teaching the next group of kids how to fix their own bikes. The kids stood there for a moment, processing what Jack had said. Then, with a newfound sense of purpose, they began to work. They spent the next few hours organizing their tools, setting up a workstation in Jack's garage, and preparing for the community bike repair project that would kick off the following weekend. Jack watched them, feeling a deep sense of pride. This wasn't just about bikes anymore. It was about creating a cycle of giving, learning, and growing, a cycle that would continue long after the last bike had been fixed. And as the kids worked, Jack knew they were on the right path. They had learned the most important lesson of all, that with patience, dedication, and a little help from each other, they could fix more than just bikes, they could fix their community. The community bike repair project was in full swing, and the kids had truly taken ownership of it. Every weekend, they gathered at Jack's garage, working together to fix up bikes for the neighborhood. What had started as a small idea had turned into something much bigger. The kids were now known for their initiative, and more people were bringing their bikes for repair. It wasn't just about fixing bikes anymore. The kids had built a sense of pride in their work, and their efforts had begun to ripple through the community. Jack stood in the doorway of his garage one Saturday morning, watching the kids as they worked. There was a new energy in the air, something different. It was no longer the hustle of trying to get everything done in time, it was the focused rhythm of a group working toward a shared goal. Sarah was working with Timmy on a bike, their movement smooth and efficient. Jack couldn't help but smile at the sight. Sarah had become a natural leader, her quiet confidence shining through in everything she did. "Hey, Jack!" Sarah called out as she stood up from the bike. "Can you help us with this one? We're having trouble with the gears." Jack walked over, his step steady, and bent down to take a look. "Let's see what we've got here," he said, inspecting the gears. As he worked, Sarah and Timmy stood by, watching intently. Jack had stopped giving them direct instructions weeks ago. Now, they were the ones asking the right questions, figuring out solutions, and making adjustments. "You know, Sarah," Jack said as he worked, "you've come a long way. When you first started, you weren't sure you could handle it all. But look at you now." Sarah smiled, a bit of pride creeping into her expression. "I guess I'm starting to see it differently. I used to think it was just about knowing how to fix things. But now I realize it's about having the right mindset. You taught us that." Jack nodded, his hand still working with the bike's gears. "It's about being patient and staying focused. You've all learned that. Now, you're passing it on to the others." Timmy chimed in, "Yeah, we've started teaching the younger kids, too. They're bringing their bikes over every week, asking for help." Jack paused for a moment, standing up and wiping his hands on his work apron. "That's the spirit," he said, his voice steady with approval. "You're teaching them more than just how to fix bikes. You're teaching them how to take care of things, how to be responsible." The group had grown beyond just the original kids. More kids had joined in, eager to learn and contribute to the cause. The repairs were no longer limited to just fixing broken bikes. They were teaching lessons about teamwork, responsibility, and community. The garage had become more than just a workspace, it had become a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together with a common purpose. As the day went on, the kids worked seamlessly, each one taking on different tasks, helping one another with anything that needed attention. Jack watched them, his heart swelling with pride. They had become a team, not just in fixing bikes, but in life. They had learned that every small effort added up, that every setback was just a chance to learn something new. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garage, Jack couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. The kids had learned from him, but now, they were teaching him too. They had learned how to fix bikes, yes, but more importantly, they had learned how to fix what mattered most, themselves and their community. Months passed, and the bike repair project continued to thrive. What started as a small neighborhood effort had turned into a community-wide initiative, one that even the adults had begun to take notice of. The kids, now known for their skills and their generosity, were becoming local heroes in their own right. Jack watched from his garage, a quiet pride swelling in his chest as he saw the younger generation take the reins. He had taught them how to fix bikes, but they had taught him something far more valuable, the power of community and the impact of passing on knowledge. One afternoon, Sarah rode up to the garage with a group of younger kids. This time, there was no bike in need of repair. Instead, they had a different request. "Jack," Sarah began, her voice filled with excitement, "we've been thinking. We want to do something bigger, something that helps even more people." Jack looked up from his workbench, wiping his hands on his apron. "What are you thinking?" he asked, intrigued by the seriousness in her tone. "Well," Sarah said, glancing at the kids beside her, "we were talking, and we think it's time we take this beyond just bikes. What if we could help fix other things too? Like small repairs around the neighborhood, broken fences, leaky faucets, maybe even help with gardening for some of the older folks who can't manage it anymore." Jack stood silently for a moment, taking in what she was saying. This was no longer just about teaching kids how to fix bikes. This was about taking responsibility for their community, using their skills to make a real difference. "That's a great idea," Jack finally said, nodding with approval. "You're not just fixing things anymore, you're building something that will last. You're giving back to the people who've been there for you." Sarah smiled, clearly proud of the direction the project was taking. "Exactly. We've learned so much from you, Jack. We want to make sure it keeps going, even when we're all older. And we want to teach others to do the same." Jack's heart swelled with pride as he looked around at the group. They had come so far. He had started out teaching them how to fix bikes, but now, they were teaching him the true meaning of community. They weren't just fixing things, they were changing lives. As the days passed, the kids worked tirelessly, helping neighbors with everything from fixing broken fences to mowing lawns. Their efforts were making a real impact, and soon, word began to spread about their work. People started reaching out, asking for help, and the kids, led by Sarah and Timmy, continued to give freely, working together to make their community a better place. One evening, as Jack sat on his porch, watching the sunset, Sarah and Timmy rode up, their bikes now a familiar sight in the neighborhood. They dismounted and walked over to him, their faces beaming with pride. "Jack," Sarah said, "we've been thinking. We want to start a fund, a way to raise money so we can buy more tools, maybe even start helping people who can't afford repairs at all." Jack leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You've really come a long way, haven't you?" he asked, his voice filled with admiration. "You're not just learning how to fix things. You're learning how to build something that lasts, something that helps everyone around you. That's the real work." Sarah and Timmy exchanged a look, a silent agreement passing between them. "We couldn't have done any of it without you, Jack," Timmy said quietly. Jack chuckled, shaking his head. "You all did it. You've made this project your own. I'm just glad I could be a part of it." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack sat back in his chair, watching the kids who had once doubted his abilities now changing the world around them. He knew, deep down, that the work they had started would continue long after they had all moved on. They had learned the most important lesson of all, that the real value of fixing something wasn't in the repair itself, it was in the difference you made along the way.